I decided that I wanted to look all dressed up and delicious, but last night I decided to give myself the darndest little haircut, and it just looks so gross. My name is Leo, it is so nice to meet you. Happy birthday, Merry Christmas. Welcome to the Crust Cast, the crustiest podcast this side of the Milky Way. I'm gonna be your host for this crusty Sunday evening. This is a subculture, punk-oriented, activism-oriented, kind of whatever I want to talk about at the moment-oriented podcast. I hope you're gonna enjoy this episode. Firstly, a disclaimer, I'm gonna have my script that I'm going to use for later right here, so if that's in any way distracting to you that I'm going to look over here, please just be mindful that I can't remember every single thing I have to say, because I have yogurt brain. I am a little bit about myself. I just turned 19 on the 22nd of October, and my favorite color is yellow, my favorite animal is bee. I'm very passionate about subcultures, and I'm very passionate about punk in general and kind of the history of punk, where it came from, kind of the etiquette of it, and so on and so forth. So I wanted to make this little podcast to talk about that, being that it is one of my interests, and I am also very interested in social justice in general. So I wanted to kind of make a podcast that can help you maybe educate yourself on a few of those topics. The first podcast, the episode that you're watching right now, is kind of going to be a guide for those of you who are baby punks. Maybe you're new to the punk subculture, maybe you have a friend, a loved one, someone you know, someone you've passed by who identify themselves as punk, and you want to know more about what punk is and where punk came from, so that you can kind of understand the subculture better, which is so good. It's always great to educate yourself, and I fully encourage you, after you've listened to this podcast, to go on and educate yourself even more. I identify mostly with the classic punk, as well as with some queercore and peace punk ideologies. Those are some that I'll get into on a later episode. This episode I'll focus mostly on the classic punk ideologies and where classic punk came from. So punk, punk is like a general concept, is so wide that no one really agrees on where it started or who started it. Because it is a subculture, there's no like set date, like October 31st of 1954 is the day that punk started, because we can't really define it that way, because it's not a historical event. In that sense, it's more of a subculture that emerged in different places around the world at different times. Generally though, people tend to agree that it came from what is known as garage bands that emerged in the mid to late 60s. Bands like the Stooges, the MC9, and the Sonic Raw had kind of a rough guitar strumming, like a heavy guitar strumming, that became pretty associated with what classic punk would become. And they also had some political lyrics, but it wasn't quite the heavy-duty, very rough around the edges type of stuff that punk is very known for nowadays and became very known for in the 70s and 80s. The first scene to claim the punk label, though, was in New York around 1974. Opened by Hilly Crystal, the bar in New York, the CBGB, which is firstly the best ever name you could give to a bar. The CBGB, that's so fun to say. God, I love that name. Good on Hilly, honestly. It was the country, bluegrass, and blues bar, and was originally intended as a place for blues and bluegrass musicians, as well as poetry readings to be held. But it was one of the first bars that hosted punk bands back in 1974. The Ramones, one of the first punk bands, had their first show at the CBGB. In August of 1973, the Mercher McCurr Art Center, also known as The Kitchen, which is a bit easier for me to say than the McCurr, which was a non-profit performance center that hosted art exhibits. It hosted band rehearsals as well as concerts and poetry readings. This art center collapsed and it would no longer be running, which left a lot of young unsigned rock bands without a place to host their music and break through. Some of these bands included The Suicide, The Fast, Ruby and the Rednecks, Wayne Country, and the Magic Tramps, who would all later perform at the CBGB. Later in 1974, two locals called Bill Page and Rusty McKenna convinced Crystal, the owner of the CBGB, to allow local bands to host shows at the bar. The first band they booked back in February of 1974 was local band The Squeeze, which Crystal booked to perform every Tuesday and Wednesday, and that led to a change in the bar's overall kind of vibe. That meant that more local punk bands and more local rock bands would go on to perform at the bar. On April 14th of that same year, Patti Smith and Lenny Kaye were at a television gig in the audience, and the Patti Smith group would later go on to debut at the CBGB live on February 14th of 1975. Other early performances included the newly formed band Angel and the Snake, later renamed as Blondie, as well as the Ramones, who all arrived in August of 1974. And the Ramones, which I mentioned earlier, is actually considered the first ever punk band by many. And they got known for playing 2 to 3 chords quite rapidly, and they paved the way for many punk bands to come, and many punk bands have expressed that they were inspired by the Ramones, including the Sex Pistols. The Ramones' first self-named album was highly praised by rock critics because, unlike many rock stars at the time, these songs were very political, very heavy. The Ramones didn't have these angelic vocals or fabulously good looks that rock stars like Elvis had. So the album really broke through as being something new and was considered the first ever punk album. Meanwhile, in the UK, the scene was emerging around the same time with the Sex Pistols and the Damned. England's punk scene had deep political and economic roots, as at the time in the UK a lot of stuff was going on financially. They had a very big, a lot of young people were left without a job and without a home to some extent. So, which left a lot of British youth very bored and very angry because there wasn't a lot being done about this job crisis. So a lot of the classical punk attitude and aesthetic actually emerged back in 1975 out of a shop known as Sex. It would start in London in 1974, and they would become well known for the iconic punk rock style, with a lot of spikes, band shirts, safety pins, this DIY aesthetic with a lot of holes and once again looking very rough around the edges, which was the appeal. The store was owned and opened by Malcolm McLaren, who had moved from New York, where he was unsuccessful in starting the band The New York Dolls. So in 1975, in a partnership with guitarist Steve Jones, drummer Paul Cook, and bassist Glenn Maddock, he formed the Sex Pistols. But they needed a lead singer, and for that job they found their lead vocalist Johnny Rotten, who was hanging around the store a lot at the time. He had this He is described as having this like green spiky kind of greasy hair and a shirt that says "I hate Pink Floyd," and was kind of the catalyst for this punk rock attitude, which is kind of ironic because today he is a raging Trump supporter. It's kind of funny that a guy who had this punk band back in like the 1970s is now, you know. Anyways, the band would perform their first gig on November 6th of 1975 at the St. Martens College where Glenn Maddox studied. The plug was pulled on the concert, on like the performance, before they could even finish, but that didn't stop them, and they would actually go on to perform at a lot of other different venues like schools, colleges, and bars. Larger venues in the early 1976, such as the 100 Club and the Nashville. On the 4th of June 1976, at the invitation of Harvard DeVito and Pete Shelley, who would form the Buzzcocks, the band played their first gig in Manchester. Their performance at the Lesser Free Trade Hall inspired a lot of punk rock to emerge in the city of Manchester. The Clash and the Damned made their live debuts, opening for the Sex Pistols that same year. Sex Pistols released their first single, Anarchy, in the UK on November 26th, 1976. The song was angry, loud, and quite witty, and it did spark some controversy around the UK. That song, together with the song God Save the Queen, did spark quite a bit of controversy, but it also encouraged more teens and young people to break out of their shell and embrace this new punk culture. One of these people were Susie Sue, who would hang around the Sex Pistols a lot and would become one of the people who would actually walk around with the Sex Pistols and go to every single concert they had. And Susie Sue would go on to start her own band, Susie Sue and the Banshees, and she was also a style icon for punk at the time, seeing as she had this very classical, very well-known punk aesthetic with a lot of things being DIY, the very heavy eyeliner, all that kind of stuff that has kind of been very synonymous with some goth culture and some sub-punk culture. The classical punk attitude is very much built on a love for anarchy and crafting and a hate for big corporations and authorities, as well as capitalism. With a DIY aesthetic built on spiky, colorful hair, piercings, clothing you've crafted yourself, patches, tattoos, and clothing that often has a deeper political meaning behind it, as well as often shows off some of the bands you like. What you need to take away with kind of where punk started is that it came out of a place of poverty, it came out of a place of anger, it came out of a place of not fitting in and not having a lot. So what a lot of these younger, very early on punk kids had was this synonymous love for very angry, very loud music, this synonymous love for making their own clothing, and a synonymous, somewhat political ideology. If you're a bigot, if you're a racist, if you're a Nazi, you can be so kind and fuck off, and I hope the door doesn't smack you in the ass on the way out. Hi, it's editing me, makeup lesson wearing a beanie. I'm here because at this point I said some dumb shit and I'm here to clear that up. At this point in the video, I said that a lot of groups, a lot of punk bands back then and still now are bigoted and anti-Semitic. That is not at all true, that is not at all what I meant. I meant that some groups, punk bands at the time and still now, use slurs that we know not to use. Some bands now and then hold some views that are bigoted and harmful in some way that you may disagree with and may not want to align yourself with. That is completely 100% valid. Also, that some groups now and then, and probably in the future, have committed some sort of sexual assault, general assault, or have been involved in child pornography cases. Please be sure to educate yourself and look into if the band that you like are problematic. I will do my best to see if I can link any immediate sources that may tell you not to listen to a specific band, if I can find any that may like be really alarming. Otherwise, make sure to just look into what you like to make sure that it is something that you want to associate with. So yeah, I'll let you go back to the video and I hope you enjoy the rest of it, so I'll hop out of here. See you. But with that little PSA, I will hop off of my soapbox and I'll give you 4 song recommendations that I feel like you should listen to while I angrily follow the mosquito that is very meanly flying back and forth in my room. Firstly, definitely go listen to I Wanna Sniff Some Glue and The KKK Took My Baby Away by the Ramones. Both 2 very good songs. Then I feel like you should listen to Nazi Punk's Fuck Off by the Dead Kennedys, and as a bit of a newer punk song, definitely go listen to I Threw a Glass at My Friend by Destroy Boys. You're welcome. I will link those songs as well as the sources that I used for the history part down in the description below. So we are about 20 minutes into this, so now I'm gonna kind of deviate a bit from what I just talked about, and we're going to talk a bit about the fashion, some things that I feel quite important to note, and some things that I feel like we need to discuss. And the mosquito is still very much pissing me off over in the corner. Isn't it incredible that it is October 24th and I still have mosquitoes in my room? I find that insane. Especially considering that I am living in Scandinavia and they should have been dead back in March. But no, still here, still going strong, thank you. Fashion, shall we? As I've mentioned, punk is built on a DIY aesthetic. It is built on crafting. We love crafting. It's not 5 minutes crafts, it's anarchy crafts. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you cannot afford punk fashion. You can. You can do so much with a pair of scissors, some bleach, a needle and a thread and some safety pins. You can create art. You can create a Monet. Far away it's pretty good, up close it's big ol' mess. That is what most of my fashion is. So you can pretty much turn any item of clothing that you own into a piece of punk alternative fashion. It is very easy. The punk aesthetic was originally built on a few values. It's thrifted, it's hand-me-downs, it is stolen, or it is DIY'd. I don't encourage you to go out and steal, but see what you can get from thrift stores, hand-me-down stores, what you can DIY yourself, or what you can get from small businesses that make alternative clothing. Let's grab a hold of 3 or 4 different punk fashion items that I feel are important that you know a bit about. Firstly, starting from what this podcast is named after and what is on my leggies right now. I'm gonna stand up so that you can see these. Look, what if I stand up on my couch? Can you see my... Ta-da! These here are Crust Pants. It's what my podcast is named after. What are Crust Pants? Well, Crust Pants are exactly what they sound like, a pair of very crusty pants. Originally starting in the crust punk subculture, a subculture of punk started in the 1980s in England, started by Ambics and Anti-Sect. The music genre was pessimistic, it was political, it had fast guitar riffs, growling and screaming vocals, think metal mixed with emo, mixed with punk. It's great. Crust punks often wear baggy hoodies, ripped jeans, and clothing that's covered in patches and paintings from their heads to their knees to their toes. And it is amazing, and that's where crust pants originate from. Either covered in paintings or covered in patches that are political or have to do with bands that you like. This fashion statement, if you will call it, is a staple in a lot of punk's wardrobe. It's spilled over into pretty much every single subsection of punk. Where did they get their name from? Well, they could have gotten their name from the fact that they are, like, associated with crust punks. Could have gotten the name because the painting made the pants a little bit crusty. Or could have gotten their name because it is nearly impossible to wash a pair of pants that you have painted on. A pair of painted pants. It's nearly impossible to wash. So if you don't wash your pants, they do become so crusty that they can stand on their own. So you can nearly like do a hop into them if you really wanted to. But moving on from that into something that has to do with that kind of emerged out of the same scene, which you're seeing here right next to me. A battle jacket. I'm gonna go over the rules for like both of these in the same, because they're kind of in the same lane, the same vein. A battle jacket is a battle jacket, a battle vest, kind of exactly what it sounds like. It is a piece of clothing that you cover in patches and pins that kind of show who you are as a person, politically and music-wise, as well as style-wise. It often has a very massive back patch that is kind of a thing you have to have. Mine is a smiley that says trans rights or human rights, because that's something that's very important to me. And then it has a lot of pins that I've found on the street, or gotten from friends, or from places that I've gone. It's a very sentimental piece of clothing to me. And so are these crust pants. Kind of the rules for punk clothing is that there are no written down rules, but a lot of unwritten rules that people either follow to a T or are very upset that exist. With battle jackets, it's that you pretty much always have to have a patch on the back. You pretty much always have to have some sort of like safety pin or spike or pin in general. And that in general, this applies to both the jacket as well as the pants. You don't put anything on there that you don't know what is or that you don't agree with. So if you don't listen to the Dead Kennedys, then you don't put a Dead Kennedys patch on there. It has to be something that you're willing to agree with and willing to stand by. But other than that, there aren't really any written down rules. Just know that people are gonna, to an extent, hold you accountable for whatever you put on your clothing. People are gonna be upset if you put something that is bigoted or shitty on your clothing, and they're gonna call you out on that. So don't act like a big baby if it happens. Please. Damn. Moving on from that, though. I don't know if I even want to mention this, if I even want to talk about it, but I feel that I need to, because it has gotten a resurgence on punk TikTok recently. These are my Doc Martens. I got these yesterday, so I'm not wearing them right now because they are as stiff as a board, and if I wear them for even a second longer, my feet will fall off. But yes, these are Doc Martens. They are the classical punk booty. If you have ever googled picture of a punk, you will probably have seen a pair of Doc Martens. Mine are with a platform sole because I am like 5'7", and I wish to be just an inch or two higher, taller. But yeah, I don't know if you can see, but I have ladder laced these. I have partly done that to show you an example of what ladder lacing is, because that is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about ladder lacing and lace code. So what is lace code? Well, started in the 80s and 90s by skinheads. If you don't know what skinheads are, they are neo-Nazis. They have a shaved head, leather jacket, and ladder-laced boots. At least that's the very stereotyped version of what a skinhead is. Started by skinheads, leather lacing was a way to subtly show other skinheads, other neo-Nazis and white supremacists that you were one of them. This happened with red laces for the neo-Nazis and white laces for the white supremacists, respectively, and was kind of a way to communicate, hey, I too am a bigoted asshole who deserves to be punched in the shins. Are you also a bigoted asshole who deserves to be punched in the shins? Well, then we agree on something. It kind of then got picked up by other punk communities, and different laces started having different meanings. I'm gonna go over the ones that I, off the top of my head, remember, and the ones that I think are the most important for you to know. Firstly, red and white, most often a no-go. Ladder lacing also is when you lace your boots in this very specific way. They are kind of, as you can see, laced so that they go straight over. The laces most often have to be actual Doc Martens laces or leather laces. The boots more often than not have to be actual Doc Martens boots. At least that was the original rules for any of these to count, and it's what a lot of people will tell you. Later, other punks would start picking up on what leather lacing and lace code was, and start making their own meanings for different colors of laces. The red and the white have pretty much stayed the same. Hi, it's me again. I say that the red and white have stayed primarily the same, the red being that you're a neo-Nazi or that you're anti-Semitic. Earlier today on TikTok, I did see a video that included a guy who had yellow on one of his boots, was wearing an Antifa shirt, and then had red laces on his other boot. And when I looked in the comments, because of course I was a little baffled by this, when I looked in the comments, people did say that the red lace also meant anarchy. So in any of these cases, please pick up on like context clues and stuff in regards to lace code. But also, my point still stands on a little rant I'm gonna go on later in regards to red and white laces, so just keep that in mind. And the purple means that you're an ally of the LGBTQIA community, or that you're a part of said community. The yellow means that you are anti-Nazi, anti-racism, that you support Black Lives Matter, that sort of thing. Blue is one of the ones that are difficult, because red, white, black, yellow, and purple, most people tend to agree on. Black is neutral, yellow, anti-Nazi, anti-racist, purple, in support of the queer community or part of it, red, Nazi, white, racist. The rest of them are kind of more fluid in their meaning. Blue could mean, I've seen people say it means ACAB, I've seen people say it means that you've killed a cop, I've seen people say that it means you're up to fight people. Full-on fist fight. I've seen some people say that it means that you cannot pick between being a racist and not being a racist. So I do not in fact know what they mean. I tend to just stay away from blue, but also just, I don't know, some people say ladder lacing doesn't matter at all, so I guess everything's free reign and the world is anarchy at this point. Green, also one of those that doesn't really have a meaning, but also does. Some people say it means vegan, some people say it means animal friend, some people say it means nature enthusiast, some people say it means peace punk. Speak too fast for my own good. Then we have the orange one, doesn't have a meaning at all, and the violet and pink one is feminism. Like, if it's pink and purple, it means that you're a feminist, so that one is also great. I love those. I wish you could have three laces on your boots, in fact. But yeah, those are the ones I remember off the top of my head. And I have seen a lot of debate go on about whether or not ladder lacing is valid and whether or not lace code is still important or relevant today. Because I have seen some people say that they should be allowed to wear the color of laces that they want to wear, and that they should be allowed to wear red ladder laces on their Doc Martens boots because red is their favorite color. And while I see the sentiment, and while I see that it may be frustrating that you can't show that your favorite color is red without people calling you a Nazi, wouldn't you also not want to ever associate with anything that has ever been associated with Nazis? Wouldn't you want to not wear something that has been used in an anti-Semitic way and has been used to hurt people? Because that's where my problem comes in. Because I see that you may have a preference for the color red, or the color white, or the color blue for that matter. Or that you may have a preference for a band that has been accused of racism, or been accused of anti-Semitism, has been accused of sexual assault, and so on and so forth, and you like them, and you have a preference for them, and you don't understand why you can't listen to them, wear their merch, or why you can't wear a certain thing that has been associated with one thing or another that most people synonymously agree is quite terrible. And I'm here to tell you, I'm here to get up on my soapbox, get into my social justice position. I'm gonna tell you that if your preference for something has been used to hurt people, has been used to victimize people, has been in any way used to express an opinion that is hurtful or is bigoted, then that is no longer a preference. You should be able to, if you are, especially if you are a punk or part of any alternative subculture that is political, you should be able to say, well, my favorite color may be red, but I'm not a Nazi, so of course I won't wear red laces, because I know that that has been used by Nazis. I feel like that's a bit of a no-brainer. Whether or not you agree with lace code is not my question. Whether or not you agree with lace code is none of my business. But you should be aware that if you choose to ladder lace your Doc Martens boots with red, that people are gonna call you out on it and try to educate you. Because people don't want you to look like a fucking Nazi. My guy, it shouldn't be the unpopular opinion that you shouldn't wear something that has been associated with bigoted, awful people. It's not a preference anymore. It's supporting bigotry. That's not okay. Getting off of my soapbox somewhat, kind of crouching down on my soapbox, I'm gonna leave you with this note. Please, if any of what I said today caught your interest, please do continue to educate yourself. I will continue to educate myself because I still have a lot to learn, but I wanted to take this opportunity to maybe teach you something if you were just getting into punk and wanted to know a bit. I will leave every single source that I have used for this in the description below, together with some song recommendations that I have for you, together with some petitions that you can sign, some sources that you can use to educate yourself on various things, some charities that I think you should definitely look into, and some important things that are going on right now that I think you should look into, including some of the police brutality that is going on around the world right now, some of the racism that is going on around the world right now. I am gonna link the Me Too movement, because they just recently started a new thing for sexual violence survivors. I am gonna leave just a whole bunch of important stuff that I feel you need if you want to educate yourself and become a more educated, more socially aware person. So please do feel free to check that out. And lastly, I just want to say that I really, truly, honestly appreciate you so much for coming here today and listening to me and letting me talk about something that I feel they're passionate about, and taking the time out of your day to watch this. It means the absolute world. Thank you for joining me on this here crusty ass couch. I hope you have a great Christmas and a happy birthday. You look great, and I will see you, my guys, gals, and non-binary pals, on the next Crusty Sunday. Have a good one. I love you so much. Bye-bye.